Fiancee and stepdaughter scam me out of $124,000 to fund ex-husband's lavish life. All right, so I'm Greg, 49, and I've been with my fiancée Amanda for 15 years. Never married, but we've been living together long enough that it feels like it. Now, Amanda's daughter Cassie, who's 25, is getting married to her boyfriend Max. And like an idiot, I agreed to pay for the wedding. I thought, hey, I've been in Cassie's life since she was 10. She's practically my kid, right? Wrong. I'm not rolling in cash, but I've done well for myself with my own business. I'm not trying to brag, just saying I've worked hard to get where I am. Anyway, Cassie's dream wedding is some big fancy deal, and somehow the budget ballooned to around £100,000. That's like $124,000 in US dollars. Yeah, crazy, I know. But I didn't want to be the bad guy and ruin her big day, so I just went along with it. I thought it would all be worth it, to see her happy. The first red flag was when the wedding invitations went out. I noticed my own mom and stepkids weren't on the list. Amanda's side? All there. Max's side? Covered. I asked Amanda about it, and she says, "Oh, it was probably just an oversight. Cassie must have forgotten." Seriously? My mom gets forgotten from her granddaughter's wedding? That didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. I didn't want to make a scene, figured it'd get fixed. So I bring it up to Cassie a few days later, all casual like, "Hey, what's up with the invites? My mom and the kids didn't get one." She acts surprised and says it's a no-kids wedding, which, okay, fine. But then I find out Max's nieces and nephews are invited. So now I'm sitting there thinking, what the hell? I ask her why my stepkids aren't invited if it's a no-kids thing. She fumbles around, saying it's just a mistake, and she'll fix it. Now, here's where things start really getting weird. A couple of nights later, we're having this nice family dinner with Max's parents at my place, and Cassie starts talking about the wedding. Everything's going fine, and then out of nowhere, she drops this bomb. She's decided that her real dad, Tony, who's been a total deadbeat her whole life, is going to walk her down the aisle. I'm sitting there, completely blindsided. I mean, this guy has been out of the picture for decades. He's never paid child support, never showed up for her, and all of a sudden he's daddy of the year because he reached out to her 6 months ago? The same guy who ghosted her for years now gets the honor of walking her down the aisle? What about me? I've been the one who raised her, took care of her, and let's not forget I'm the one paying for this whole thing. So I look at her, totally shocked, and say, "Wait, I thought I was walking you down the aisle." Cassie doesn't even blink. She just says, "Yeah, I thought about it, but it's important to me that my real dad walks me. He's my biological father." Now I'm pissed, but I'm trying to keep my cool because we've got guests. So I calmly ask, "Well, if your biological dad is walking you down the aisle, is he also going to help with the wedding costs?" Cassie just shrugs and says, "No, of course not. You've always said you'd pay for it." At that point, I lost it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice getting louder. "I pay for your £80,000 wedding, but some deadbeat who's done nothing for you gets to walk you down the aisle? How does that make any sense?" Cassie goes quiet, and Amanda, sitting next to me, looks like she's about to explode. I could tell she was embarrassed in front of Max's parents. But honestly, I didn't care at that point. It felt like I'd been slapped in the face. And it wasn't just the walk down the aisle, it was the whole situation. Here I am, shelling out £80,000, which is no small chunk of change, and I'm just supposed to be the guy writing checks while the deadbeat gets all the glory? Nah, that wasn't gonna fly with me. Max's parents, sitting across from me, look super uncomfortable, like they're not sure if they should say something or just stay quiet. Amanda finally speaks up, saying something like, "Greg, we've been planning this for over a year. You can't just back out now." Oh, but I could, and I did. I stood up from the table and said, "If your real dad is good enough to walk you down the aisle, he's good enough to pay for the wedding. I'm done. You can figure it out." The room went dead silent. Cassie looked like she was going to cry. Amanda was glaring at me like I'd just ruined everything. And Max's parents? They just sat there, looking like they wanted to disappear. I didn't care, though. I'd had enough. All right, so after the whole dinner fiasco where Cassie announced her deadbeat dad would be walking her down the aisle, things in my house turned into a total mess. I thought Amanda and Cassie would cool off after a day or two, maybe realize they were wrong, and we'd talk it out like adults. But nah, they doubled down, hard. The next morning, Amanda storms into my office, absolutely livid. She's yelling about how I've embarrassed her and ruined all the wedding plans. It wasn't even about the wedding itself anymore. She was just pissed that I made her look bad in front of Max's family. Not once did she stop to think about how I felt after raising her daughter for 15 years, only to be treated like some side character in her life. She hits me with, "We've already paid deposits on everything. You can't just pull out now, Greg." I told her, I can and I will. If Cassie wants her biological father to be her main guy at the wedding, let him handle the costs. Amanda went off about how we couldn't get refunds, that pulling out now would mean losing everything. I wasn't buying it, though. So I grabbed my laptop and checked out the contracts I'd signed with the vendors. Most of them had cancellation fees, sure, but we were still within the window to get most of the money back. She didn't believe me, of course, so I showed her. And that's when she switched tactics. Now, it wasn't about me ruining the wedding, it was about how I was letting down family. She actually said, Cassie is your daughter. Don't you want to see her happy? That hit me like a brick. I thought about it for a second. And yeah, I did want to see her happy. I mean, I'd been there for all her major life moments, her high school graduation, when she got into college, her first job. But the thing that was gnawing at me was how she could just replace me like I was nothing. How could she just drop me after all those years? But then I remembered the night before, sitting at that dinner table, hearing her talk about her real dad like he was some kind of hero. That brought me right back to reality. So I stood firm and said, if Tony is the one walking her down the aisle, he can be the one to pay for it. Amanda wasn't hearing it. She kept saying that Tony didn't have the money, that he was broke, and that I was supposed to step up and be the bigger person. I shot back with, I'm not a piggy bank, Amanda. You want a wedding? You figure it out. Then came the real kicker. Amanda dropped the bombshell. Whoops, sorry for using that word. She tells me that I wasn't just paying for the wedding. Nope. Cassie and Max had also planned this lavish honeymoon in Mauritius, and guess who was footing the bill for that too? Yep, me. The tickets alone cost around £30,000, about $37,500, first class and everything. Now, you have to understand, I never agreed to pay for the honeymoon. I thought I was just handling the wedding expenses, which was already a ridiculous amount. So I asked her straight up, since when was I paying for their vacation? She tried to downplay it, saying Cassie and Max had just assumed I'd cover the whole thing, since I was already handling the wedding. Like, seriously? I was just supposed to assume that I'd be shelling out for a honeymoon too? I laughed, but not in a funny way. More like one of those, I can't believe this is actually happening kind of laughs. I told Amanda, there's no way I'm paying for them to go on a fancy vacation. That's not my problem. She flipped out, saying I was ruining everything for Cassie and that I was being selfish. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm the selfish one? I was about to spend nearly £100,000 on a wedding, and now I'm supposed to add another £30,000 for a vacation? That's almost £130,000, about $160,000, down the drain, all because Cassie wanted to play pretend with her bio dad and live like royalty for a week. At this point, I was done. I grabbed my phone, started calling up the vendors, and began the cancellation process. The venue said I'd get a partial refund, but it was better than nothing. The caterer was able to refund most of the deposit, but it'd take a couple weeks. Honestly, I didn't care how long it took, as long as I wasn't throwing more money into this black hole. Now, here's where things get really crazy. Cassie found out what I was doing, probably because Amanda told her, and she stormed into the house, screaming at me, "How could you do this? You promised. We've been planning this for a year." I stayed calm and told her, I didn't promise anything. If you want your real dad to walk you down the aisle, he can pay for it. You're not getting a free wedding and a free vacation out of me. She lost it. She started calling me every name in the book, saying I was ruining her life, and how she deserved this big wedding because it was her dream. And then, the part that really got me, she said, "You're not my real dad anyway. Why should you care?" That was it. I was done. I told her to get out of my house. Amanda tried to calm things down, but I wasn't having it. I told them both they had a week to pack up and leave. I wasn't going to be disrespected in my own home. The thing is, I wasn't even mad about the money anymore. It was the fact that after all these years, I was still being treated like an outsider. I had given Cassie everything, a roof over her head, food on the table, and yeah, even love. But apparently that wasn't enough. All that mattered was that I had money, and they wanted to use me for it. A few days later, I went through my bank statements and changed all my passwords. No more access for Amanda or Cassie. If they wanted to throw a wedding and go on vacation, they'd have to figure it out themselves. I wasn't about to be used anymore. Update 1. So after I canceled the wedding and told Amanda and Cassie they had a week to move out, things in the house got real awkward. I could feel the tension every time I walked into a room. Amanda wasn't talking to me unless it was to argue. And Cassie? She acted like I didn't even exist. It was like I was the villain in a movie, but all I did was stop them from using me like a human ATM. The thing is, I thought maybe they'd cool off, take some responsibility, and try to make things right. I don't know. Maybe I was being too optimistic, but nope. They just kept acting like I was the one in the wrong for pulling the plug on the whole thing. Amanda kept saying stuff like, "You're tearing this family apart, Greg. Is that what you want?" And every time I heard it, I just thought, family? Since when? A couple of days go by, and I hear Cassie on the phone with Max. She's freaking out because, surprise, they can't afford to pay for the wedding themselves. Apparently, Max's family wasn't as loaded as I thought. I mean, they had a nice house and all, but they weren't sitting on piles of cash. They were probably counting on me to pay for everything too. Cassie was crying, saying they had no idea what they were going to do now. I could hear her through the walls, and part of me felt a little bad. I don't hate the girl, you know? I raised her. But after the way she treated me, I wasn't going to cave. I stayed strong because, honestly, I knew if I gave in now, they'd just keep taking advantage. Now, here's where things get interesting. About a week later, after they were supposed to be moving out, Amanda comes into the kitchen while I'm making coffee. She looks serious, like she's been thinking about something for a while, and says, "Greg, we need to talk." I'm like, "Yeah? What about?" She sits down and starts going on about how things have gotten out of control, that maybe they were wrong for assuming I'd pay for everything, but that Cassie's wedding is still important, and we should find a way to make it work. I cut her off and said, "Amanda, I'm not paying for the wedding or the honeymoon. We've been through this." But then she drops something I wasn't expecting. She tells me that Cassie's biological dad, Tony, the deadbeat who never paid a penny in child support, had recently come into some money. Apparently, he'd won a settlement from an old work injury lawsuit, something like £25,000, around $30,000. Not enough to cover the whole wedding, but a decent chunk. And guess what? He wasn't willing to put a single pound toward the wedding. Nothing. Not even after everything Cassie did to bring him back into her life. Amanda told me that Tony basically said, "I've got my own plans for that money." I almost laughed, but I held it in. So this guy, who Cassie is letting walk her down the aisle, gets a fat check and won't even help his own daughter with her wedding? Meanwhile, I'm supposed to cover the whole thing? Yeah, no thanks. I looked Amanda straight in the eyes and said, "And you still think I should pay for this wedding?" She sighed and said, "I know it's a lot to ask, but I didn't realize Tony wouldn't help at all. I thought he'd at least pitch in." At this point, I'm thinking, this whole thing is a disaster. But then Amanda says something that really took me by surprise. She goes, "Cassie doesn't want to move out." Now that was news to me. I thought they'd both be ready to pack up and leave after I cut off the wedding money, but apparently Cassie was in a panic because she had nowhere to go. Max's family didn't have room for her. And Tony? Yeah, forget about it. The guy wasn't even offering her a place to stay. So now they were trying to figure out how to stay in my house without me losing my mind. Amanda starts saying maybe we can come to some sort of compromise. "Maybe if we scale back the wedding," she says, "we could make it work with what little money we have." I wasn't buying it. I told her, "This isn't about money anymore. It's about respect. I'm not just a wallet, Amanda." She tried to argue again, saying that family is about sacrifice and supporting each other, but I'd heard enough. I cut her off and told her that Cassie and Max could figure out their own wedding, and they had until the end of the week to be out of the house. No exceptions. Amanda walked out, and I could tell she wasn't happy, but what else was there to say? I wasn't budging, but of course things weren't over yet. The next day, I get a text from Max. It was out of the blue, and he'd never reached out to me directly before. I figured he was going to apologize or something, but nope. Instead, he starts demanding that I reconsider paying for the wedding. He actually had the nerve to say, "This isn't just about Cassie, Greg. You're affecting my life too." I couldn't believe it. This guy who barely spoke to me when we met was now trying to guilt me into paying for his wedding? I didn't even respond. I just blocked his number. I wasn't about to let some 25-year-old kid tell me how to spend my money. Later that night, Amanda tells me that Max's parents had been pressuring him to reach out to me. Apparently, they were just as desperate to get this wedding paid for as everyone else. I couldn't believe how all these people saw me as nothing more than a checkbook. I told Amanda, "That's it. They need to leave by Friday or I'll start packing their stuff myself." She tried to push back, but I wasn't having it. I've already made my decision. I'm not changing my mind. By the time Friday came around, Cassie and Max had finally realized that they weren't getting a free wedding, and Tony? Well, I never heard from him again. Amanda and Cassie packed their things, and that was the last I saw of them. For the first time in weeks, my house felt quiet, peaceful even. And while it sucked that things had ended like this, I knew I made the right choice. I wasn't going to be used anymore. Update 2. So after Amanda and Cassie moved out, I finally had my house back to myself. For the first time in what felt like forever, it was quiet. I'd like to say things went back to normal, but man, it didn't take long for the weirdness to kick in. A couple of days after they left, I started getting these random calls from unknown numbers. At first, I ignored them, but when they kept coming, I finally answered one. Guess who it was? Max's mom. Yeah, out of all people, she's the one trying to get in touch with me. Now, I barely know this woman. We've maybe exchanged a few words at family events, but we're not exactly close. She starts going on about how she's worried about Cassie and how this whole situation has been hard on everyone. I could tell right away she was fishing for something, probably trying to guilt me into changing my mind about the wedding. I cut her off and told her straight up, "Look, whatever's going on with Cassie and Max is none of my business anymore. They'll figure it out." But she wouldn't let it go. She kept talking, saying how they were struggling to find a place to live and dealing with financial stress. I wasn't buying it. I mean, come on. They were expecting me to drop around 100,000 pounds, close to $120,000, on a wedding, but now suddenly they're broke? I told Max's mom the same thing I'd been telling everyone else. It's not my responsibility. She finally got the hint and hung up, but I could tell from her tone that this wasn't over. Sure enough, a few days later, I get a text from Amanda. She hadn't talked to me since she moved out, so I was surprised to see her name pop up on my phone. I opened it up, and it was this long, rambling message about how they'd found a small apartment, but they were struggling to cover the rent. She didn't outright ask me for money, but it was clear that's what she was hinting at. I didn't even respond. I was done, but things just kept escalating from there. One afternoon, I'm sitting at home when there's a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I figured it was just a delivery. Nope. I open the door and there's Cassie standing there with Max, and they're both looking pretty rough, like they hadn't slept in days. I was caught off guard, but I wasn't about to invite them in. Cassie immediately starts with the guilt trip. "Dad, we didn't know what else to do. We're really struggling right now, and we thought maybe you could help us out just this once." She's got tears in her eyes, and I could tell she was trying to pull at my heartstrings. Max just stood there, looking awkward, not saying anything. But here's the thing. After everything that had happened, after the disrespect, the lies, and them treating me like a walking bank account, I wasn't about to give in. So I told her, "Cassie, I've done enough. You've got a real dad, remember? Maybe he can help you out." That set her off. She started yelling, saying how Tony had bailed on her again and wasn't answering her calls. She said he took his 25,000 pounds, about $30,000 settlement and disappeared. Big surprise, right? The deadbeat dad she chose over me turned out to be a deadbeat after all. Max finally spoke up, trying to be the reasonable one. He said, "Greg, we're just asking for a little help, maybe enough to cover our first few months of rent until we get back on our feet." I wasn't having it. I looked at them both and said, "I've already helped you. I gave you 15 years of my life, and I was willing to pay for your wedding until you decided your real dad was more important than me. Now, you're on your own." Cassie started crying harder, but I could tell it wasn't because she felt bad for what she'd done. It was because her plan hadn't worked. Max was just standing there, looking defeated, and I almost felt bad for the guy. Almost. I told them both to leave, and as they walked away, Cassie turned around and said something that honestly floored me. She goes, "You're going to regret this. When I have kids, they'll never know you. You'll be the grandpa they never meet." I was stunned for a second. I mean, after everything, this was her final shot? Trying to hurt me by threatening to cut me off from future grandkids? It was such a low blow, but it didn't hit me the way she wanted it to. If she thought I was going to cave because of that, she was dead wrong. I just shook my head and said, "Good luck with that." Then I closed the door. But here's where it gets even weirder. A week later, I get an email from Amanda. Not a text this time, an actual email. She starts out by saying she's sorry for how things have turned out and that she wishes we could have worked things out differently. And then she drops the real reason she's emailing. Apparently, Max had called off the wedding. She didn't go into details, but from what I could piece together, Max finally had enough of Cassie's drama. He couldn't handle the stress, the money problems, and the fact that Cassie had burned so many bridges. He decided it wasn't worth it anymore. Amanda was asking if I could talk to Max, see if there was any way to convince him to reconsider. Like I had any influence over the guy. I hadn't even known him that long, and after everything that went down, I wasn't about to start playing matchmaker. I didn't reply to the email. What could I even say? It wasn't my problem anymore. But you know what the real kicker, sorry, there's that word again, was? A few days later, I heard from one of Amanda's friends that Tony, Cassie's bio dad, was spotted at a casino in Brighton, blowing through his settlement money like it was nothing. So while Cassie and Max were out here scrambling to pay rent, Tony was living it up, probably gambling away what little cash he had left. Honestly, the whole thing was just sad at this point, but at least I was out of it. Update 3. So after Cassie and Max showed up at my door begging for help, and after Amanda's ridiculous email asking me to fix their relationship, I thought I'd seen the last of the drama. Honestly, I was ready to move on. But of course, life had one more twist to throw at me. About a week after I got that email, I got an unexpected visitor, Amanda's brother Tim. Now, I've never been close with Tim. We've met at family gatherings, exchanged the usual pleasantries, but that's about it. So when he showed up at my house, I was immediately suspicious. What could he possibly want? Tim walks in, looking all uncomfortable, and I could tell right away he didn't want to be there. He sits down and starts with some small talk, asking me how I've been and all that. I wasn't in the mood for chit-chat, so I just asked him, "What's this really about, Tim?" He sighs and gets to the point. Cassie's in trouble. Max really left her this time, and Amanda's worried she's going to do something stupid. She's not handling things well. He looked at me like he expected me to jump up and fix everything, like somehow I was the key to making it all better. I just stared at him for a minute, trying to figure out if he was serious. "Tim, what do you expect me to do? They burned every bridge with me. I'm not swooping in to save them now." Tim shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, man, I know it's not fair, but they're really struggling. Cassie's talking about moving in with some friends, but they're not exactly the best crowd. Amanda's freaking out, and she doesn't know what to do." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They really thought I was still their safety net, even after everything. I told Tim, "I'm not responsible for Cassie's choices anymore. She made her bed, and now she's got to lie in it." Tim looked defeated, but he wasn't giving up just yet. "But what about Amanda? You guys have been together for 15 years. Don't you care about what happens to her?" And that's when it hit me. This wasn't really about Cassie at all. It was about Amanda. She'd been trying to find a way back into my life ever since I told her to move out. The email, the phone calls, the whole guilt trip about Cassie. It was all a setup to get me to take Amanda back. I stood up and looked at Tim, trying to stay calm. "I care about what happens to Amanda, but I'm not her solution anymore. She chose Cassie and Tony over me, and now she has to live with that decision. I'm done being the one they turn to whenever things go wrong." Tim didn't have much to say after that. He left, and I thought that would be the end of it. But I should have known better. A few days later, I get a letter in the mail from Amanda. Yeah, an actual handwritten letter. Who does that anymore? I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the best of me. In the letter, Amanda basically poured her heart out. She apologized for how things went down, said she regretted how she treated me, and begged me to reconsider. She even said she'd been thinking about getting back together, starting fresh, and fixing things between us. She also mentioned that Cassie had found a new place to live, some apartment downtown, and that she was working part-time at a coffee shop to make ends meet. Apparently Tony had vanished again, this time for good, and Cassie was back to square one. Amanda said she was terrified for Cassie and didn't know what to do without me there to help. The whole thing felt like a last-ditch effort to pull me back in. But by this point, I was over it. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of the guilt trips, tired of being used, tired of always being the one to fix everyone else's problems. I'd given them 15 years of my life, and what did I get in return? Disrespect and betrayal. I crumpled up the letter and tossed it in the trash. After that, things finally started to settle down. I didn't hear from Amanda, Cassie, or Max again. For the first time in what felt like years, I had peace. No more drama, no more begging for money, no more guilt trips about being family. It was just me, in my house, living my life on my own terms. One day I got a call from my oldest son, Ben. He's 28 and has a family of his own. We don't talk as often as I'd like, but we're still close. Anyway, Ben called to tell me that his wife had just had their second child, and he wanted me to come visit. He even said they'd named the baby after me, Gregory Jr. That call meant the world to me. After everything with Amanda and Cassie, it was nice to know that someone still appreciated me. I booked a flight out to see Ben and his family, and let me tell you, holding my grandson for the first time was the best feeling in the world. It made all the crap I'd been through worth it, knowing that I had real family who cared about me. Before I left for the trip, I got one final piece of news. Remember Tony? Well, turns out, he wasn't just gambling away his settlement money. He'd also racked up a huge debt with some shady people. Word on the street was that he skipped town to avoid paying up, and nobody knew where he'd gone. Typical Tony, right? I didn't feel sorry for him. In fact, I felt a weird sense of satisfaction. Cassie had thrown me away for a guy like that, and now she was paying the price. I wasn't happy about it, but I couldn't deny that it was a little bit of karma coming back around. As for me, I was finally free. Free from the drama, the manipulation, the constant feeling that I was never enough. I was focused on my real family now, the ones who actually valued me for more than just my money. And you know what? It felt good. Really good. Really. Update 4. You asked when I thought things had finally calmed down. Something I never expected happened. You'd think after months of drama, people would just move on and leave me alone. But apparently that's not how life works. One afternoon, I get this message from someone I didn't recognize. It was from a lawyer's office asking me to call them back. I'm sitting there thinking, great, what now? I've been done with Amanda, Cassie, and the whole mess for a while now, so I couldn't figure out what this was about. I call the number, and the lawyer introduces himself and says he represents Tony. Yeah, that Tony, the deadbeat dad who vanished after blowing through his settlement money. My first reaction? Total confusion. What could Tony possibly have to do with me now? He was out of the picture, right? Well, turns out Tony had passed away. He got into some serious debt with the wrong people after losing his money gambling, and long story short, his disappearance wasn't by choice. The lawyer didn't give too many details, but it was clear Tony got in over his head, and things didn't end well for him. At first, I didn't really know how to feel about it. I mean, Tony was never a real father to Cassie, and as much as he caused problems in my life, I never wanted anything bad to happen to the guy. But here's the kicker. Sorry, I know I said I wouldn't use that word, but this really got me. Tony left everything he had to Cassie. Now, when I say everything, don't get excited. It wasn't some big inheritance or anything. The guy was broke by the time he passed. But there was one thing Tony left behind. A small house just outside of Birmingham. Apparently, it had been in his family for years, and somehow it never got sold during his many attempts to get out of debt. So, why was the lawyer calling me? Well, Tony had listed me as a backup contact because Cassie wasn't answering any of their calls. No surprise there. She'd probably moved on with her life after Max dumped her, and dealing with Tony's mess was the last thing on her mind. The lawyer asked me if I knew how to get in touch with her so they could settle everything. I sat there for a minute, thinking about whether I should get involved. I hadn't spoken to Cassie since she stormed out of my house, threatening that I'd never see her kids. Kids she didn't even have yet. But for some reason, I felt like I should let her know what was going on. So, against my better judgment, I gave the lawyer her most recent phone number and left it at that. A few days later, I get a call from Cassie. It's the first time I've heard her voice in months. And honestly, I wasn't sure how the conversation was going to go. She sounded different. Quieter, more serious. She told me she'd gotten the message from the lawyer and didn't know what to do. She didn't want anything to do with Tony's estate, didn't want the house, didn't want the responsibility. And then, something unexpected happened. She apologized for everything. I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me was still holding on to the anger from how she treated me. But hearing her apologize, hearing the regret in her voice, it caught me off guard. She admitted that she'd been selfish, that she'd let Tony back into her life without thinking about how it would affect me, and that she regretted choosing him over me. She didn't ask for money, didn't ask for anything, really. She just wanted to apologize and say that she wished things had been different. I stayed quiet for a while, thinking about how much had changed in the past year. I'd finally gotten my peace, and I wasn't about to let myself get sucked back into the chaos. But at the same time, I felt like this was the closure I hadn't realized I needed. So I told her, Cassie, I appreciate the apology, but what's done is done. You made your choices, and I made mine. I hope things work out for you, but I'm moving on with my life. She didn't argue or try to guilt trip me like she had in the past. She just said, I understand. That was the last time we spoke. As for the house Tony left behind, she ended up selling it, using the money to get a fresh start somewhere else. I don't know where she is now, and to be honest, I don't really care. I've got my own life to live, and I'm finally free from the weight of all that drama. And you know what? It feels good to close that chapter for real this time.